is the Northern Missouri Historic District Supervisor at Missouri State Parks. He's worked with Missouri State Historic Sites since 1991. The Battle of Island Mound State Historic Site was dedicated in 2012 and is located about 70 miles south of Kansas City. The site is significant as it is the first Civil War battle site where African Americans fought against Confederate forces on October 28, 1862. Please join me in welcoming Jim Rehard.
Thank you. I want to first of all thank the Freedoms for Frontier National Heritage Area for organizing this. The speakers have been tremendous today. I've been sitting in the back taking notes, and I feel like I'm in a classroom here. I've learned a lot and taken a lot of notes, and thank you all so much for your input today. I work with our Missouri State Parks, and in Missouri, since I'm in Kansas, I need to explain, in Missouri State Parks, we are modeled very much after the National Park Service. In that, we include both state parks, recreation and natural resources, and historic sites with cultural resources and such. I know here in Kansas, we have a split. Kansas State Parks are parks, and your historic sites are run by the Kansas Historical Society. So this is why this Missouri, the state park guys that you're talking about, a history site. What we have found in Missouri at a number of especially our Civil War battle sites, is that a lot of people do not know when the Civil War even occurred. So we've been encouraging all of our interpretive staff to start off with the premise that maybe one person in the group drug everybody else there, and that one person is the Civil War enthusiast, and they need to get everybody else caught up to speed. So that's kind of what I do when I show this movie. And I also want to thank Sonia Smith. Sonia's, your technology skills have been tremendous. I gave her a challenge. This is not a little different format. She's done a tremendous job. I see she's got her finger paused for just a moment here. And here's the spiel I give for this movie when I traveled with it. Every Civil War battle was about slavery. Slavery was pivotal to the cause of the war. Why enslaved Africans, why were they an issue in Missouri? Well, here are some basic events. Before Missouri and Kansas became part of the United States, this area was controlled by American Indians, especially the Missouri, the Osage, and the Kaw and Kansas nations. First European contacts came in 1673, and France lays claim to the areas west of the Mississippi and struggles with Britain over tracts east of the Mississippi. The French seek trade with the Missouri, Osage, and Kaw, but also take on entrepreneurship such as mining lead in East Missouri. Both French and Spanish authorities bring enslaved individuals to work these mines. Thus, slavery by Euro-Americans is introduced into what would later become the Louisiana Purchase, and even later Missouri and Kansas. By 1776, all men are created equal in those 13 colonies out east. 1787, the Constitution codifies slavery and counts every enslaved individual as 3/5 of a person toward representation in the House. 1793, Eli Whitney patents his cotton gin and creates tremendous need for more enslaved persons to pick cotton to feed the gins. Each decade until 1860 sees a doubling of cotton production. 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. Agreement is in place to keep the French and Spanish practice of allowing slavery in the territory in place due to its previous existence and the prevailing attitude that enslaved individuals were property. 1820, the Missouri Compromise. This is the first major debate directly over the existence and management of slave states since the contentious decade of the 1780s and 1790s. By this time, it is clear that many issues on the national level are linked to slave versus free legislators. And there's a need to maintain a balance in the U.S. Congress. It becomes very critical. Missouri petitions for entry into the Union in 1817 but cannot enter until a free state materializes, a la Maine. No other state above the 3630 parallel will be slave except Missouri. This is the beginning of the official dividing line between North and South in our nation, due to the existence or absence of slavery. 1850 Compromise, this deals with the westward movement and whether slavery will be allowed in the territories absorbed by the recent results of the 1846 war with Mexico, especially in California where gold has been discovered. Compromises in this act include the fugitive slave laws, which require any state, including free states, to return runaway enslaved persons. 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe's runaway fictional bestseller, Uncle Tom's Cabin, raises the social consciousness among a growing populace, many of whom are unaware of the implications of slavery and the treatment of enslaved persons, what they must endure. It may be one element that leads to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, whereby, instead of relying on geographic location, it will be left up to the people living in a territory and deemed populous enough to consider statehood to determine whether they desire to enter the Union as a slave or as a free state. Missourians feel very threatened by this, as they already have free state of Illinois on the east and Iowa on the north. They fear a lost market to sell and yet another border that can become an escape route. Massive and largely recognized fraud, as so many Missourians cross the border to vote in Kansas for the pro-slavery cause. Many voters cast ballots more than are in the territory. I think that as they were crossing the border, they were encouraged to vote early and vote often. 1855, of course, 1861, the border war, and it becomes a training ground for the Civil War. Raids into Kansas by Missourians and into Missouri by Kansas. There are massacres, homes and towns burned. John Brown gets his start before he goes on to Harper's Ferry. 1860, Abraham Lincoln's elected in November. South Carolina secedes in December. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas leave in January and February 1861. March 1861, before Lincoln is inaugurated, the Confederate States are formed, and Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy, delivers his cornerstone speech, which is also published, and it defines the reason for secession. Quote, "Our new government is founded, its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." March 12, 1861. States that secede have similar phrasing in their departure declarations. Also in 1861, there's a convention in Missouri, and they determined that there is no benefit for Missouri to secede, despite a pro-secessionist governor. April 1861, Fort Sumter is fired upon, and Missouri is divided. Missouri, a slave state but not committed to the Confederacy, had an imposed state government and a government in exile. Distrust was rampant. Federal troops were sent into Missouri from Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Kansas to keep Missouri's allegiance. Atrocities in this area were already occurring and had been since the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. It can be said that the border war provided a training ground for those aligned along both sides of the Civil War in West Missouri and East Kansas. During the border war and into the Civil War, slaves were sometimes liberated in Missouri and Arkansas by Kansans. And once the war begins in earnest, many more enslaved blacks escape bondage by entering Kansas. The first 18 months of the Civil War did not go well for the United States Army. In the East, or out here in the Western Theater, first Senator of Kansas, Jim Lane, had befriended Lincoln and demonstrated an ability to mobilize troops. And he mobilized troops in Kansas. His troops wrought terror in western Missouri in 1861 when his Kansas brigade sacked and destroyed Osceola in September, and then returned in December, torched Pappensville and Butler, and liberated more slaves whenever possible. This was a direct affront to Lincoln's orders to refrain from this sort of activity. In July 1862, Jim Lane is given an appointment to recruit for the Department of Kansas, and he includes recruiting former slaves who are now in Kansas, with the promise that they will be used to fight for the Union. He informs the War Department in a matter that goes unnoticed for a while, and then fails to comply when he is ordered to cease this action. Meanwhile, training has begun, and uniforms and arms are assigned to about 500 free blacks and former slaves who are eventually settled into a facility named Fort Lincoln. Eventually, orders arrived to send these men into action into Bates County, Missouri, to clear out a gang of bushwhackers operating on Hog Island. Every Civil War battle was about slavery. Slavery was pivotal to the cause of the war, After this battle, this phrase takes on a new meaning. The Battle of Island Mound is the first engagement in the Civil War that pitted free black men and formerly enslaved black men, many freed or escaped from Missouri, recruited in Kansas, trained in Kansas, and sent back into Missouri from Kansas to oppose the Southern force. Let's show the movie, please.
Okay, very quickly, 46 years, 11 months, and 19 days ago, last time I was in this building, graduating from Quindaro High School. And out of that 14-year career, I did say 14, not 13, I never learned anything in any of the history classes or anything taught in the schools about this event taking place in walking distance to me from this spot. And I feel a sense of anger for that being excluded, but also a sense of profound pride in knowing that it happened despite my knowing about it or not. I know now. So I want to, that meant a lot to me because Jimmy Jackson was a personal friend of mine, and losing him was a lot. He would tell that story like it could be told before, but that connection with Quindaro, with the Miller Plantation, where the airport is today, and also where we're also making sure that those who didn't leave the plantation, who were buried there, that they're being respected as they build the airport up there. But finalizing my comment, I just want to say thank you for showing this. Thank the state of Missouri for acknowledging that site as it sits down there. And lastly, this film is being shown repeatedly at the Bruce R. Watkins Cultural Heritage Center, where I sit on the board. And anytime anybody want to come by and do it or bring a group or a class, please feel free to come to 3700 Blue Parkway or Blue Parkway in Cleveland, Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. And those interviews were held and conducted at the Bruce R. Watkins Center on the second floor there. So thank you and the board for letting the filming folks use that avenue. On behind me, you'll see just a PowerPoint presentation on a loop of the actual Battle of Island Mound. So that's in the background here. There's just some images from there. It should be advancing on its own. If you want to bump it up.
Could you hold the mic up?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is less of a question as a comment. I just wanted to comment that members of my tribe, the Wyandotte Nation of Kansas, the Delaware, and the Sac and Fox fought in the 1st Colored Unit. And those African-American soldiers that died in the Battle of Blue are buried in the Huron Cemetery at 7th in Minnesota with my tribal members. And there's a plaque in the back of the cemetery commemorating their burial. The only ones that are not still remaining there were part of the Topeka Regiment that went back to be buried with their white comrades and arms in the historic Topeka Cemetery.
Thank you for sharing that. We know that the 1st Kansas lost 8 individuals in this battle, and they are buried somewhere on the property. We just know that the records show that they were buried north of the Toothman Farm. Now on the property, there's the Toothman Farm. We don't know whether it's the property or one of their buildings or where that is, but we've had quite a few archaeological surveys out there trying to find the Toothman Farm exactly. We have not located the farmstead, the farmhouse itself yet, but we surveyed very carefully the parking lot and all our areas that we're using for public contact, and we know that it's not there, but we treat the grounds as a commemorative grounds, and that's why we don't do battle reenactments on Battle of Island Mound or Battle of Lexington and such.
Okay, I didn't know if you made the statement that the documentary earned 2 Emmy awards.
No, I haven't yet. I wasn't. I'm trying to keep with links with Quindaro and not just talk about our film. We're very proud of this film, and the reason it was produced was because we acquired this property in 2007, 2008. we kind of had to scramble to get it up and running by 2012 in time of the 150th anniversary. We were able to accomplish that. We still have no staff there. It's a very important site. We want to get the word out, so we thought we did a little creativity, and maybe a film was the way to do it. It was a state contract. We had bids out for this company. Brent Bradfield went way beyond our expectations, and he kind of got Civil War fever, I think, and was so intrigued with the story, he kind of went above and beyond our expectations, and it has won 2 Emmys, one for Best Cinematography and one for Best Historic Documentary in this length. His limitations was it had to be under 20 minutes, and so it went 22 minutes. But we do have the version that is available for sale is lengthier. It has a lot more of the interviews. Don Scott has a very lengthy, and Willa Dean and Joseph Gardner have much more to say in the extended interviews. Ma'am?
As a former Missouri State Representative, I am very proud of this product because when I served, the property had not been purchased, and it was due to Reverend Larry Colvin, who had a
Yes.
church down in Butler.
Yes.
I did go down for the commemorative ceremony that he
Very
was
good.
at before the site was purchased, so I'm glad to see that the site was finally able to be acquired.
And Larry was able to make it to our dedication there, and he was in a wheelchair for part of the time there, but he was able to get around and had a nice conversation with Larry. He was instrumental in raising the issue. I've got a whole spiel about all that, too.
We have time for one last question.
Was this made entirely with public money, or were there any private benefactors?
This is entirely public money.
How did you convince the Missouri government to do that?
How did we what?
How did you convince the Missouri government to do that?
It was a different time frame then and now.
No, we are a lot longer. It only cost, I think, $25,000, which is, Brent has gotten in trouble by other filmmakers for producing such a quality film for that price.
I can't imagine Kansas paying $25,000.
Please join me in thanking Jim Rehard.